we are very privileged to have Elior, Professor Elior here, from the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. Her recent books are Israel Baal Shem Tov and his contemporaries, and grandmother did not know to read and write.
Thank you very much. I wish to thank the organizers for inviting me and to give me an opportunity to share with you a few observations about the beginning of Hasidism from the point of view of the participants. We were privileged to hear very many interesting lectures about the way that Polish people are viewing Hasidism, different photographers are seeing Hasidism, different pictures are representing Hasidim, but we have not heard one single sentence said by any Hasid. You know, they're not only art objects, they are human beings. And they have been along the 18th century and the 19th century and the 20th century and the 21st century, and we have every reason to believe that they would continue to flourish. It is unusual to have a historical phenomena carrying on for centuries and centuries, but it should be noticed on the front. It is changing all the time. The Hasidim of the 18th century are not the Hasidim of today. But Hasidism as a phenomenon had started in the 18th century. It is really closer to a medieval phenomena, although it's 18th century, than it's close to the modern world. And why is that? Because Hasidism really, on Hasidism, it's really appropriate to apply the definition of the anthropologist Margaret Mead. Never underestimate a small group of people capacity to make a change. A small group of people who is resolving to make a change will make a change. In fact, that's the only way changes had taken place. Hasidism had started with a very small group of people, very few. Israel Baal Shem Tov was born on the turn of the 18th century, some says 1799, 1798, it doesn't really matter. We can say 1700, we would be fair enough. He started to work in any kind of public exchange only in the 30s of the 18th century. And it took time. At the beginning, they were very, very small group. However, what was about him that made people to come to him, to listen to him? You know, one may start by saying he is the only Jewish leader that 1,400 books have been written on him while he himself did not write a single book, okay? Usually, most of our heroes are writers. You know, if you say Maimonides, or if you say Rabbi Akiva, or if you say the Gaon of Vilna, they are writers, they are scholars. They have been acknowledged by their contemporary for their wisdom. It could be through the generations, but you have a written paper, a written book by a person that had said something that have not been said before. Israel Baal Shem Tov, on whom 1,400 books have been written according to my last check on the inventory of the National Library in Jerusalem, the title Israel Baal Shem Tov or Israel Besht is mentioned in at least 1,400 books. Probably there are more with abbreviation or in other languages, but in Hebrew, 1,400. And he did not write a single book. That's important to remember. So what did he do? Why Hasidism had started and as an innovation, and what had happened with his followers, his contemporaries, his students? We're talking on small numbers. What had happened was he was a student of Kabbalah. He was studying Kabbalah. He was studying mystical writings. Now, many other people were students of Kabbalah. Kabbalah was a very favorable topic. Books had been published since the 16th century. People could buy and read and learn the Book of Splendor, many other Hasidic books in the course of the 17th century, 18th century. He, like many others, was studying books of Jewish mysticism. However, unlike others, he thought that the books are about himself. He was not a reader of a text. He was a player in a theater, in a way. The book for him, or the books rather, the books for him were like a musical score that he was the musician. He was not a listener, he was the musician. And it's important to me to understand the metaphor. The texts were written before him. It could be the Heichalot literature, early Jewish mystical text from the time of the Mishnah and the Talmud, talking about ascent to heaven or talking about hearing angels. He read it. He read the book of Zohar, whether he read it himself or somebody had read it aloud for him. He read the book of Zohar. He read the Loriani Kabbalah or the Safed Kabbalah, anything that was printed, he had access to, he read it. But, as I said time and again, many others read. Readers were numerous. But he had interiorized the text as if he is the hero of the text. So concepts and ideas that were written in a clear way, in a mystical way, in a dreamlike way, in the huge Jewish mystical library, had been interiorized by him, and he was playing as if he is the hero. He was repeating what had been written earlier as a score of, as if those are the scores of music, and he is playing anew the musical score. But why? Where? When? Let me start by saying that mystical writings or mystical dramatizing are always preconditioned by tragedies, by hardship. You never write a mystical book because you are happy or because you are rich or because you are very well-to-do. On the other way around, you write mystical literature when your world is absolutely chaotic, when the world is collapsing, when there is no sense, when you have a profound sense that God had turned his face from you, that you are deserted, that you are alone, that you are tragically mistreated, and there is nothing you can do about it. Let me clarify, Jews had invested any effort, any reasonable effort, political effort, monetary effort, diplomatic effort to embetter their situation, always. They were very good at it. They were clever. They were trying always to be the best citizens, the best taxpayers. They were always trying to have the best of conditions and to be the best of citizens. However, regardless to their behavior, there was this ancient tragic anti-Semitism that was burning anew every century on different reasons, and they were charged for sins that they have not done. Jews, like any other communities, have their score of criminals, they have their no-goods, they have their dumps and bumps and so on, but we're not talking on that. We are talking on charges of the kind that I wish to read to you. Polish historian Janusz Tazbir, a great historian, said the following: Polish society and the Christian population at large, Jews belonged to a group to which norms of human compassion, I'm sorry, excuse me, I didn't start right. In the view of both Polish society and the Christian population at large, Jews belonged to a group to which norms of human compassion did not apply. It would seem that in old Polish society, the Jew was what Leszek Kolakowski was later to call a man with no alternative. He could be summarily brought to court as the alleged perpetrator of a ritual murder. In daily life, he was a clown whom everybody, from street urchins upwards, could insult and spatter with mud. That's a historical assessment of Polish historian who is writing about the Jews after he had studied in detail the different scores of blood libels, which were frequent in the end of the 17th century and along the first thirds of the 18th century, exactly in the time that Hasidism had emerged. The situation was tragic as the King of Poland had said the following: The infidel Jews, the scoundrels, the villains, they are pouring the blood of Christian children in a hidden way, in a horrible way, in a broken heart way. That situation is calling upon divine revenge. That's the King of Poland, August II, in 1712. That made a lot of impact. Now, one of his noblemen said, I have decided, in company with other men of honor, to exterminate the Jewish people. That's from the book of Leon Polyakov, History of Anti-Semitism. There are thousands of quotes of that kind. Hatred, false charges. Do you know what is a blood libel? That's one English term that is not mentioned in any English dictionary. There is no blood libel in any English dictionary. They call it ritual murder, because the Christian people really believe that Jews are assassinating children for ritual murder. Now, we never, never, never murdered any child for ritual murders. And I want to clarify, we had our villains, we had our simple thieves, or we had our simple murders, but we never, never ritualized a murder. We never cooked matzot with children's blood. It was commonly believed by the Polish population and by the church and by the monks, that that's what Jews are doing. Now, every effort had been done to clarify that this is nonsense, nonsense. Never Jews needed any blood of anybody for any ritual purpose. But it was common to accuse Jews with that. Now, of course, it didn't help that the Polish Senate at the Sejm at 1799 declared that every Jewish community where a Jew would be sentenced for blood libel or for ritual murder would be excommunicated and thrown away from the vicinity. All property would be kept by the local government. All Jewish property would be confiscated and would be kept by the local government. There were so many blood libels. There is a lot of work about it by Polish scholars, by Jewish scholars. There are volumes and volumes and volumes. But the word blood libel is not to be found in any printed dictionary. As I said, they call it ritual murder. Israel Baal Shem Tov had started his mystical career, and mystical means transcending borders. When you are not living only on this world, in your awareness you are crossing borders and you are corresponding to heavenly realms. He had started his mystical career around the blood libel of Zaslav in 1747, which was unusual. In every usual blood libel, a child would be found, unfortunately, murdered or dead. A Jew would be accused of murdering him, usually more than one Jew. The important members of the community would be put in prison, and they would try to get out of it. They were offered to convert in order to be freed from the tortures. Usually they would refuse, sometimes they would agree, and then somebody would be executed, others may be free. But in the Zaslav blood libel, where there is never a person who speaks on behalf of the accused, only a person who is speaking on the side of the accusers, okay, there is no litigation on the side of the accused. That's the only kind of judicial process where the accused have no legal help. They are known to be sin. They are known to be sinners. They are known to be criminals. That is beyond discussion. The only reason that a trial would be going on is in order to have an admittance of the person who had been charged, because you cannot prosecute without an admission. Admission would be given by tortures. Everybody would admit to anything if you would be put on the torture wheel. And as I said, that was usual. The only thing that was exceptional in the Zaslav blood libel was that after they had converted, they were killed. That's the background of the heavenly ascent of Israel Baal Shem Tov to heaven. That's the first time he went up to heaven, in his mind, in his dream. He's telling us in his famous holy epistle that he had ascended to heaven on Rosh Hashanah, a time where the gates of heaven are known to be open according to Jewish tradition. And he had two conversations. He had a conversation with the Messiah, that I'll go back immediately to, and he had a conversation with the representative of the other side, Samael. That means the Sitra Achra, the devil, the Diabolo. He asks him, you gained, you got what you wanted. They converted, because the church wanted people to convert. So Jesus would return the next time after all the Jews would accept Christianity. He said to him, you already won. They converted in order to save their life. Why did you kill them? So he's telling him in the holy epistle the tragic answer. I did it for your sake. If I wouldn't have killed them, all of you would convert in any time of a blood libel. That's the devil saying. Now, he had another conversation. All that is relating in a very famous holy epistle to his relative in Eretz Israel. And he asked the Messiah, the one question that you always ask the Messiah, when would you come, sir? We're waiting for you. When would you come? And he said that it's going to take quite a while, because it is preconditioned by the fact that Israel Baal Shem Tov would teach the messianic teaching that he had studied in heaven to his contemporaries, to his students. And the response of Israel Baal Shem Tov was he started to cry. He said it would take far too much time. When would you come? That's not what I hope for. We need you now. We are being killed. We are assassinated. We are charged for false charges. And he said, you would teach them what I taught you. Now, what did he teach? He taught a very short sentence, a beautiful sentence. He said, you should know that in every letter of the Hebrew alphabet, yesh olamot, neshamot, ve'elohut. There are worlds, there are souls, and there is a divinity. That the new teaching that you have to teach. Now that's very interesting. He said in every letter that you speak, in every letter that you read, in every letter that you write, in every letter that you dream, in every letter that you interpret, in every letter that you translate, in every letter there are worlds, there is divinity, olamot, neshamot, ve'elohut. There are worlds, there are souls, and there is divinity. As I said, he was crying, Israel Baal Shem Tov, and he said, well, I'll start doing what you told me. I'll start teach. And he started to teach this new theory of language. But that was only a small part of what he had taught. But that was of great importance because it was not preconditioned by anything. Usually, you would be taught mysticism or mystical teachings after you had filled yourself with halakha u'poskim, after you had studied seriously the traditional teachings of the Jewish curriculum. Only then you are welcome to start to study the mystical tradition. According to what he understood from the messianic instruction, there are no preconditions, there are no restrictions, there are no limitations. Everyone who is speaking Hebrew, everyone who is reading Hebrew, everyone who is writing Hebrew, everyone who is teaching Hebrew, when you use the letters, you're engaged in wonderful things. You change your consciousness. You're uplifting the letters to their divine source. You are engaged in uplifting the Shekhinah, the female person of the deity according to the mystical tradition. You are part of a big cosmic picture, and you are not a small persecuted Jew. That was the key of the change. He didn't ask them to do anything new, none whatsoever. He only asked them to change their consciousness. He didn't give any practical instruction other than divest your soul from your body. Annihilate yourself, erase yourself, forget yourself. He was talking in the language of being and nothingness. Being in Hebrew is yesh, and nothingness is ein. It's the infinite nothingness, the divine nothingness. However, those two words have double meaning. Ein could be nothingness, but also could be the infinity. If I say on you, excuse me, you are nothing, that is at ein, okay? You are efes va'ain, like zero and nothing. But if I'll say, ume'ain ha'chokhma timatzeh, the wisdom is coming from ein, which is the infinite part of the deity. So the word ein could be the infinite God, and also the very same word could be nothingness and nihilo and zero and so on. The word yesh also has two meanings. Yesh usually is only being. Yesh and ein, being and nothingness. Yesh is being. However, it is also Yeshut, the divine being, the only thing that there is. Israel Baal Shem Tov was teaching a cosmistic teaching. Cosmos is world. Acosmic, that is, there is no real world. There is only your consciousness. If you would see on the material being, on the existential being, its true divine source, you would not see anything mundane. You would see only God. And he loved the word kol, everything. He would say, Melok, of course, that's a verse, Melok kol haaretz kvodo, the whole earth is full of his glory. But he would say, Bechol ot ve'ot olamot neshamot ve'elohut. In every letter and every letter, there is divinity, there are souls, and there are worlds. Then he would say, Bechol drachecha da'eu. You can approach God in every way. Kol adam hu ever me'ashchina. Every human being is part of the body of the divine presence. And he would go like that. He loved the word kol, all or everything. And he would say that everyone can approach the divinity which is encompassing everything. The word every was his key word. Every person is a place of God residence. Every language, every uttering, every wording is a place of the divine speech. He calls it Olam Hadibur, the world of speech. The world of speech is the name of the Shekhinah, which is the feminine entity of the divine Godhead according to the Kabbalah. Now, why do we need that? Why that had developed? For the following reason. The Jews had developed the Kabbalistic literature where God was divided to a female part and a male part because they were living under fear of extinction. The Kabbalah was created after the Crusades. The Crusades had managed to annul communities in northern France along the German-French border. There were many great Jewish communities in Worms and Speyer and Regensburg and Magenza that were once Jewish communities, and after the Crusades they were evicted. The people who stayed alive after the Crusades, the only Jewish community that was not harmed in this part of Europe, was the people in Spain, because the Spanish people didn't go on crusades because they were busy fighting the Muslims. They call it the Reconquista. The southern part of Spain was ruled by the Muslims for many centuries, and the Christians were fighting against the Muslims. Because of that, Spanish Christians were not asked to go on crusades. They had to redeem their land from the local Muslims. The Jewish community of Spain, in the end of the Crusades, were not harmed. There, Kabbalah had started to be formed. At the very end of the Crusades, which commenced in 1096 and ended in 1286, at this very time, the Book of Splendor was created. At the very end, the last decade of the 13th century. And what did they say? This world is darkness. Close your eyes to this world. Don't look at this world. Further, make yourself as far away from this world as possible. Alienate yourself to this world. Concentrate your mind only on the hidden world, where there is Garden of Eden, where there are angels, there are ladders where angels are descending and ascending. Don't think on reality. Think on the world of dreams. They would say, of course, you know, they had to work in reality as everybody else, but they said, At night, we live the true life. At night, every night, they said, every sentence in the Pentateuch, which is written in present tense or present perfect continuation, is referring to a real world which is going on. So, for instance, if it is said, V'nahar yotze me'eden, in Hebrew, a river is issuing forth from Garden of Eden. It means that a river of luminosity is coming every night to the minds of those who study the Book of Splendor. They are not only studying it, they are creating it, they are talking it. They introduce the idea that every word has many meanings. You all heard the abbreviation Pardes, Pshat, Remez, Drash, Vesod. Every letter, every word has various meanings. It could be the literal meaning, it could be the secret meaning, it could be the allegorical meaning. Anyhow, the ways to interpret words are endless. It could be 70 faces of the Torah, it could be Pshat, Remez, Drash, Vesod. In every word, according to the Book of Splendor, could be read in numerous ways. So you deconstruct the religious, ancient, holy text, and you reconstruct them by writing a new version of it. And this is an ongoing process. The Zohar is not a book. It is an ongoing process of writing and rewriting done by Chavura. Chavura is a group of students. Chibur is a composition. The group, which is called Chavura, is combining together, uniting together, writing together, editing together. It's all the word lechaber, mechaber, chavura, chibur. They are uniting together the worlds of their dreams, the worlds of their vision. And what was the world of their dreams? They said, I say it in a very short way. They say that this world that we live in is a world which is oscillating between exile and redemption. We live on exile. Because of that, the world is dark and the world is horrible and the world is all what we need to alienate ourselves from, because the world is ruled by the Sitra Achra, by the devil, by the other side. Exile is the reflection of the evil of the other side. But the Jews know that it is a dynamic process. It's not a constant thing. We are waiting for redemption. Now, here, that's the point of the Kabbalah. We, the students of Kabbalah, those who compose the compositions, those that unite together as a group of students, those that compose the writing and reading and do it all together in the luminosity that comes from Garden of Eden every night, we are promoting the advance of the Messiah by the very process of studying, of creating, of remaking the oral law. Now they say the world is divided between evil forces and benevolent forces. The evil forces are the devil, the benevolent forces are the Messiah. There is a cosmic power struggle between the good and the evil. Anyone who does everything with letters, with words, with studying, with composing, with interpreting, is helping the creating of the oral law, and at the same time is uplifting the Shekhinah, the divine presence, from its bondage of travail. They said that you're not only studying, Jews are always studying and they always had to study. It's not the study which is the innovation, it's the purpose. They say that every moment that you study, you do it leman yichud kuchabrichu ushchinte. You are studying in order to put together the Holy One, blessed be He, and the Shekhinah, the female entity of the mystical story. So you're not only studying, you're not only interpreting, you're not only reconstructing, you're not only rewriting, you're not only retranslating and write beautiful literature. While you're doing that, you're engaged in the cosmic struggle between the evil powers and the good powers. You help the good powers every moment that you work with words. So Israel Baal Shem Tov interiorized all that, all what I said, that had been formed in a very lucid way in the book of Splendor, Sefer HaZohar in the 13th century, and in the course of the first part of the 14th century. And he said, we are the Chavura, we are the group of students. We are the reinterpreters. I'll show you how in every word you can reinterpret it in such a way that you would see the divine light in it, the divine spark in it, the divine entity in it. Think on every letter. Every letter has two components. One is the sign. Every language has letters with signs, okay? It could be Aleph, Bet, or it could be ABC. There are written signs, but every written sign is a recording of a sound, of a voice, of something else. Now, he said the finite sign is the Yesh. The endless, infinite voice in it is the Ein. So every word that you say, every letter that you are using, you are uniting the infinite and the finite. Orot vekelim, the lights and the vessels, the being and nothingness. He said that the whole world had to be understood as a unity of opposites, because everything that we're thinking on has the double meaning of unity of opposites. You have to decipher the infinite beyond the finite. You have to see the spiritual beyond the actual. You have to see the infinite inspiration of divine light, of divine sparks, of divine Shekhinah in every letter, in every word. And he would say, when God said, let there be light in the very beginning of Genesis, could there be light if there won't be the words of the word light, the letters of light? Could God had created light before he had created the letters of light? Like we say light O. There are only 3 letters, that Aleph, Vav, Resh. Could God had formed or created light before there were the letters for the word light? They said no. Letters are the very foundation of creation. Letters and letters and letters, the Hebrew letters, the holy language, the divine language, are the foundation of creation. When we human beings are playing with letters, writing letters, combining letters, doing things with letters, we are participating in creation, and at the same time, we enlarge the divine light. We are helping the cosmic struggle of the good against the evil. We are part of a huge cosmic arena. We are not persecuted Jews. We are not the hateful ones, those that have to be charged with blood libels, those that have to be expelled. No, we are parts of the divine struggle between good and evil. We are active participants. We are not only miserable, little, persecuted people. Israel Baal Shem Tov, as before him did Ha'ari, Isaac Luria from Tzfat, the holy Ari, at the end of the 16th century, and before him the author of the Zohar, presumably Moshe de Leon in the 13th century, and before them, presumably, Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Ishmael of the Heichalot literature, opened a vertical channel between heaven and earth. Think on a ladder. From Jacob's ladder dream, we know Jacob had seen in his eyes, in his dreams, that there is a ladder that set on earth and reaching to heaven. Israel Baal Shem Tov said, every human being is a ladder that stands on earth and his head is up on heaven. Angels of God are ascending and descending on him. You, every one of you, he said. Now, when I say you, he's talking only to men and only to Jewish men. When everything that I say in general, he's speaking only to Jewish men, his contemporary. There are no women there, there are no non-Jews there, it's only Jewish men. The Jewish men of the party that he is teaching, where they are studying together Zohar, the book of Splendor, are engaging in those ideas. He is opening a vertical pipe, if you want, or a vertical ladder between heaven and earth, and he alone is ascending and descending. When he is ascending, he is learning something. When he is descending, he is teaching his followers, exactly as the author of the Zohar is telling on himself. He calls himself Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is ascending every night in the pillar known to those who knows the secrets. Ha'amud hayadua leyod'ei chen. He is ascending, the author of the Zohar, faced as Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, and he's learning in heaven all kinds of wonderful things. When he's coming down, he's telling it to his members of the groups, and they are interpreting and adding and rewriting and reshaping and poeticizing. That's exactly what Austin said, how to do things with words. They are creating worlds of entirely new inspiration. They don't do anything in action. They are doing in ideas. They are telling dreams, they are writing dreams, they are retelling them. It's all a matter of mind. It's not a matter of action. So this is spiritual engagement. It's not actual engagement. Now, at the same time, yes, they do write and they do compose books, but it's not about the writing. It's about what you do with your spirit. It's about your mind. And they are changing the mind. So, Israel Baal Shem Tov told his followers that he is ascending on heaven exactly as Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai did in the book of Splendor. Exactly as Rav Chaim Vital is describing Ha'ari, the holy Ari, Elohi Rabbi Yitzchak Luria in Tzfat. So we have the literary pattern of a human being, of a historical human being, in his mind ascending to heaven and descending with new knowledge. It starts as a literary thing in Sifrut HaHeichalot, in the book of Enoch, in the book of Splendor, in the Etz Chaim stories of Rabbi Yitzchak Luria. And Israel Baal Shem Tov is doing the same. Whatever is said on those literary figures or historical figures, he is reenacting like the score had been written. He is replaying it on his own. You need to have a special kind of personality to do that, because most people are reading it as two things. I'm the reader, and here is the text. Israel Baal Shem Tov is reading it as it's me, the hero, in the text, and I'm only doing what the text says. He's acting the text. He's not reading the text. So he said the following. He said, everything in this world has double facets. Everything is unity of opposites. There is nothing which has only one facet. Every word has a sign and a divine light in it. Every actual material, let's say you look on the table as the actual material. Think on, what are the letters that the table is composed from? What are those letters associated with? What is the numerical value of the letters? What can you do more with these letters? How would you rewrite the letters or read them from the other side? So he said, on everything that you do, you should do it with the letters reflecting the unity of opposites. He called it Achdut HaAfachim, unity of opposites, between the spiritual and the actual, between the inspired divine light and the concrete expression. But he said, think about it this way, according to the mystical tradition. When God Almighty wanted to create the world, he had fashioned 32 paths of wisdom, which are composed of 22 Hebrew letters and 10 numbers. The Hebrew letters are coming all the time. That now, for a sentence only for Hebrew speakers, the word ot באה מלשון יאתה ויבוא. האותיות אותות ובאות תמיד. The word letter in Hebrew is ot. Ot is a sign, ot is a letter, but ot is also from the root of aleph taf aleph, which means ye'eteh ve'yavo, something that will be coming, something that is on the process of coming. So he said the letters, this is the sentence that I quoted is from the Book of Creation, ancient mystical text that he loved very much. He said, it is said in the Book of Creation that the 32 passages of wisdom are composed of 22 letters and 10 numbers. Those 22 infinite letters, foundation letters, are all the time coming. Ye'eteh ve'yavo. The otiyot are otot uva'ot. The letters are coming all the time from the divine voice. God is saying, according to the verses, Le'olam dvarcha Adonai nitzav b'shamayim. Your words, O Holy Mighty God, are always in heaven. You are saying them all the time, so the world would exist. And he would say exactly like we human beings would not be alive 1 second if we don't have a spirit, invisible spirit, if we don't have invisible soul, if we don't have invisible some kind of spiritual entity that we don't see, but we know very much that this is what enlivens us. He said everything in the world, whether it is alive, whether it is a stone or a tree or a bird or a human being, nothing could be alive for 1 second without the divine letters which provide for it life. But here comes the mystical answer to that. It's not only the letters are coming down from upwards downwards, we human beings have to participate in the process of creation. For that we had created, so we would uplift the letters back to their source. Think on this picture of thousands of letters pouring and pouring like heavenly rain of letters, and we human beings have to uplift and take it back. They call it ratzo vashov. That's from Ezekiel, and the creatures are running to and fro, like two dialectical opposing directions. The letters are coming from heaven downwards, and we human beings have to help them to go backwards. Exactly like in the sea. There is a movement forward and there is a movement backward. There is something which is alive and something which is receding. The mystical tradition claims that the process of creation is dialectical. It's ongoing, it's eternal, it's by letters. Letters are coming through all the time, and letters have to be uplifted and returned back to their source by the work of the people. Now, they said, how do we help God to draw down the letters? In Hebrew, hamshacha, lehamshich et haotiyot, to draw them down from upwards. How do we help God to draw the letters down and down and down? We need to do all the details of the commandment. The more detailed the commandment is, the more details there are you need to do. It's not enough to say you observe the Sabbath. You have to have 72 different instructions how properly to observe. The more you have, the better, because the more details you have, the more letters are coming down. And that is like half the work. Then there is the other half. You have to uplift the letters. That is called hitpashtut hagashmiyut, divestment of corporeality. That is called hitainut, annihilation. That is called dvekut, cohesion or communication with God. So a human being is living all the time on this to and fro. He is helping the letters to come down by his work of commandments and study and details of law, and he is helping the letters to go up by divestment of his corporeality, by alienating himself to this world, by transcending all borders of any physical needs. Israel Baal Shem Tov called it hishtavut, indifference. Be entirely indifferent to your physical life. Be entirely indifferent to any physical needs you need. The more indifferent you are, the more you are open to receive the divine light. The further you go from corporeality, which is mastered by the evil forces, the more close you can go to communion with God. So you are engaged all the time in numerous things. You have to think on God, that the whole earth is full of His glory. You have to interiorize the divine presence in your mind, in your language, in your words, but it's all a spiritual work. You don't do actuality, because in the actuality you do only what you have to help to draw down the letters. But in order to help to bring them back up, you need to do spiritual work. It's called contemplation, hitbonenut, dvekut, communion with God, divestment of corporeality, הפשטת הגשמיות. that's a chance to correct a common mistake by Buber. Buber was a great scholar, but he made a lingual mistake. He said that the Hasidim are doing avodah begashmiyut, worship in corporeality. This is an absolute mistake. The Hasidim are talking on divestment of corporeality, of negation of corporeality, of erasing of corporeality. They never work with corporeality, the other way around. So, but he called it, for the sake of being short, avodah begashmiyut. There is no such a thing in the Hasidic language. The Hasidic language is annihilating corporeality. Abolish reality. Make yourself as far as possible from any reality. You need to be as angels. And the Baal Shem Tov is instructing his followers, יראה עצמו מבני העולם העליון. View yourself as a member of the upper world, all of you. View yourself as part of the angelic corpus that is ascending and descending on the ladders to heaven. You, every human being, you are the ladder where your soul can go up and your soul can come down with new insight, with new apprehension of the divine presence. But you have to be all the time aware of the fact that all what you see is God, all what you see is divine. So you negate reality, you see only the deity. You negate existential needs, you see only divestment of corporeality. Now, how many people can really do that? If you are not Yaakov Yosef of Polna, if you are not the Maggid of Mezrich, how many people can really do that? Very few. That's the reason that the theory of the tzaddik had come forth. The tzaddik, the Hasidic leader, came to be responsible on all these spiritual commitments that one have to do, because most people couldn't. You know, they say, I can try to divest my corporeality, let's say when I'm praying, when I'm contemplating, but you know, there is food to prepare, there are children to take to school, there is work that to be engaged. We can't really engage all the time in divestment of corporeality. So gradually, towards the end of the 18th century, the great mystical circle of the students of Israel Baal Shem Tov had been replaced by the first generation of tzaddikim, like Elimelech of Lezhansk, like the Jose of Lublin, the Sir of Lublin, the students of the Maggid of Mezrich. Not the direct students of Israel Baal Shem Tov, but the students of the student of Israel Baal Shem Tov. The tzaddikim are starting to work as expression of all the Hasidic teachings. They would be those that the being and nothingness would be going in their identity. They would express complete annihilating of their soul in order to bring the divine affluence to their followers. They would say, the Sir of Lublin wrote wonderful things about it. He said, Yasim atzmo le'ain. He should make himself as nothingness. So the divine affluence, the infinite ain, the Ein Sof, would draw down through him to his followers. So it's not for himself. He's bringing the infinite divine light for the Hasidim, for the followers. So what was a mystical understanding of reality, part of this divine cosmic struggle between good and evil, had become what the tzaddik is being able to do for his followers. Now, a great importance Israel Baal Shem Tov attributed to the idea of equality. He said God is present equally everywhere. Melo kol haaretz kvodo. Bechol makom Elohim. God is everywhere. God is the whole earth is full of his glory. Of course, those are verses, but he made it as a statement, not as a verse, as existential statement. So he said, since God is available everywhere, every human being can ascend can attach himself to the divine presence. I want to repeat. Since God is everywhere and equally accessible to everyone, everyone who wished to contact with the divine presence is welcome to do that. You don't need to be a high scholar. You don't need to be a man of halakha. You don't need to be a man of great charity. You and you and you, everyone who is interested to be part of the divine presence is welcome to do it. He said, "Bechol drachecha da'eu." In every way you wish, you can approach to God. There is no more transcendental God. There is immanent God, divine immanence accessible to everyone. Now, at that point, when the first Hasidic book, known as Tzavaat HaRivash, had been published in the 90s of the 18th century, and before that, when the first Hasidic book, Toldot Yaakov Yosef, and right next to it, Magid Dvarav LeYaakov, when those books were printed, the rabbis had started to read it, not those that were in Mezhibozh and the area, in Volhynia, but whoever had access to books. They decided to burn it. They decided to burn it. The Gaon of Vilna, the major rabbinical authority of the Lithuanian Jewish community, had said that this is heresy. Why? There was no heresy there. There was only enthusiastic communion with God. They didn't do anything against anybody. They did not do anything against any law. They were complete law observers. They loved the law, they loved the halakha. But for them, the important thing was the divine presence everywhere and the equal divine and the equal human access to the divine presence and the teachings of the Baal Shem Tov, Bechol drachecha da'eu vehu yeyasher orchotecha. You should approach God in any way. You wish to do it by playing the flute, or you wish to do it by singing a prayer, or you wish to do it by telling a story, you're welcome. God wish everyone to approach him in any way one may, not only in the traditional. Now, they never said anything against the traditional Jewish way. They only added to that a whole new spectrum of divine worship. The rabbi of Vilna, a Gaon of Vilna, said, burn that, burn that. That's heresy. Why? Because there was something that one may say, a difference in technical interpretation of one Kabbalistic teaching. The Lurianic Kabbalistic teaching says that in order to create the world, whenever somebody starts to tell you a story of creation, immediately ask what they want. It's not the creation they want, it's the application of the creation. Okay, Rab Isaac Luria retold the story of creation. He said, when God Almighty had desired to make the world, there was no room for that because he's infinite. His infinity had filled everything. If God is infinite and omnipotent and omnipresent, where there is room for the world? First thing, he had to withdraw from himself to himself and create an open space. It's called tzimtzum, like withdrawal. Tzimtzum, that's the very beginning of creation according to the Lurianic Kabbalah. When you read the literal text, it is said that God had withdrawn himself from himself to himself, and he ascended upwards and made an empty space where creation had started by a certain ray of light which formed vessels. The vessels were created one after the other. At a certain moment, there was too much light and too few vessels, and there was a breaking of the vessels. That's the reason that the whole world is in exile. And according to the classical Kabbalistic understanding, after the breaking of the vessels, God is to be found only in the Torah, in the halachic and Torah and all the Jewish classical holy library. But there was another school who said, oh no, it's a severe mistake to say that God had left the world. The other way around. You should read it as God had came down to this world, had limited himself in the world, according to the Hebrew verse, Hitztamtzema Shechina ben badei Aaron. Not tzimtzem as withdrew, but tzimtzem as condensed himself between two things. You know, Hebrew is a very beautiful language. You can read into that anything you want. Those two interpretations were there. It's really true. The texts are attesting on those two possibilities. And there was along the 17th century and the 18th century a lot of discussions whether tzimtzum is withdrawal from the world upwards or tzimtzum is into the world. Israel Baal Shem Tov said, according to Yosef Irga's school, that withdrawal is into this world. God did not leave the world. God is in this world. He had condensed himself through the letters, through the sparks, through the Shekhinah, into this world. And the author of the Tanya said, oh, what a horrible mistake is to suggest that God had left the world. The other way around. God is in us. We are within the divine presence. God is all around. Just we don't see it. We need to work on seeing it. We need to concentrate, and then we would see, then we would feel. So, the Gaon of Vilna said that if the Baal Shem Tov is right, and God is present in a divine spark in every stone, in every tree, in every bird, this is blasphemy. Because of that, the book had to be burned. It's not blasphemy. It had been asserted by numerous Kabbalists before the Israel Baal Shem Tov. Only they were studying and teaching in very close circles. While Israel Baal Shem Tov was teaching Zohar and Luriani Kabbalah and anything to everyone who wanted to study. He did not believe in any hierarchy, because if God is present equally to any human being, every human being is equally invited to be part of the community of students. He resented hierarchy. The Gaon of Vilna, who was the symbol of the classical Jewish rabbinical hierarchy, said, you are endangering the whole entire structure of the Jewish community. They never meant to endanger anything. They were enthusiasts. They were not social rebellions. They were not social reformers. They were enthusiasts. They were filled with God. The word enthusiast is come from the word theos. When you feel that you are full of divine inside you, you see the divine, you sense the divine. Israel Baal Shem Tov was gifted with this sense of God is in me, around me, within me, and I can share it with you, my followers, and so they felt. They were never too tired to say, God is everywhere. God is accessible equally. You should approach God in everything you do. You should think on God all the time. They're talking God, God, God all the time. They don't talk on any social matters, at least not in the beginning. They don't talk on any social reformation, not at all. They believe that they are part of the mystical tradition presented to them by the charismatic leader Israel Baal Shem Tov, who didn't ask anything other than, please see that God is here. It's within you, around you, and so on and so forth. But from 1772, where the manuscript of Tzavaat HaRivash apparently had reached Vilna, the Gaon of Vilna said, let's burn everything. Every Hasidic book should be burned. And there was further problem. At 1756, at the very place that Hasidism was flourishing, in the city of Brody, there was a big excommunication against the Sabbateans. Numerous divorces had to be enacted because in Brod there was some kind of Sabbatean festival. There was a great deal of licentious behavior of whatever. There was some Sabbatean uprising in Brod. And the Gaon of Vilna and other rabbis were suspecting the Hasidim to be Sabbateans. Nothing was further from them. They had nothing to do with Sabbateans. They were absolutely observant Jews in any way. They only added to the observant Jewish way of life a new spiritual meaning to everything they do. They did the same commandment, they studied the same text with the addition of the mystical library. They did not delete anything, they did not put aside anything. They added to the Jewish tradition a new perspective. But at 1756, there was a huge or a big excommunication bill against the Sabbateans. The Sabbateans were people who said the Messiah already had come. His name is Sabbatai Tzvi. He passed away. He will come back. There was Sabbatian rising where Hasidism grew up. They didn't know to differentiate. Those were reading the Book of Splendor, those were reading the Book of Splendor. Those were talking on the Messiah, they were talking on it. They didn't know how to differentiate, and they were far away. Vilna is far from Brody and certainly far from Mezhibur. They heard that there is some mystical circles who are reading mystical books against the prohibition of reading mystical books, which had been enacted in the beginning of the 18th century, at the 1714, where the Sabbatian circles had been excommunicated because they were people who were antinomiistic. They said the Messianic era had come, so we don't need the laws. That's different. But the Hasidim had nothing to do with Sabbatianism. They were entirely different. But those who had excommunicated them were sure that there is no difference between Sabbatians and Hasidim. They didn't take the time to differentiate. They didn't take the time to inquire. They knew that they have to be excommunicated because they are endangering Jewish life. At 1756 and 1759, there was a lot of commotion. That's the time that Hasidism with Israel Baal Shem Tov is growing and spreading, but this is the very same time that Sabbatianism was growing and spreading and had been excommunicated by the rabbis. And at that time is Yaakov Frank, who was leading the Sabbatian circles, and the rabbis didn't know to differentiate. They were afraid that all those people who were following the Hasidim were following of the Sabbatians. So they said, we will excommunicate everyone who reads Kabbalistic books. We prohibit to read Kabbalistic books before you're 40. We prohibit to read Kabbalistic books if you did not fill your stomach with the law and the halacha. We prohibit to study the Book of Splendor if you don't have an authorized rabbinical teacher. They did, and the more they prohibited to read the mystical literature, the more desired it had become. Now, one more thing I wish to say on the mystical nature of Israel Baal Shem Tov that had a great effect. One second. There was a very important halachic leader, his name is known to everyone, Yosef Karo in Tzfat. Yosef Karo, known as the author of Law, of Bet Yosef and Shulchan Aruch. But for the mystical tradition, he is a man of great importance because he had written the first mystical autobiography that had been printed. The name of the book is Magid Meisharim, which means like the angel who speak upright teaching to me. He claimed that he had received a divine revelation of the nature of prophecy. An angel spoke with him. Nobody said that an angel spoke to him from the days of the biblical prophets. Yosef Karo was the greatest halachic teacher of the generation, of the 16th century. When he said that an angel is speaking to him, he was credible. He didn't need any addition for his authority. He had enjoyed the highest of authority. Why did he have an angel speaking to him? Because he took upon himself what nobody did. After the expulsion from Spain at 1492, when he was a child, he and his family moved into Ottoman Turkey, and then he started to study, and he was a genius of a scholar, and he wanted to form a book that would exchange the rabbinical courts that had been damaged and demolished in the course of the expulsion from Spain. He said, I will collect all the previous halachic tradition and I would make judgment what should be the law, what should be the practical halacha. I would collect all the previous halachic tradition and I would do the ruling what is the current proper way. Yosef Karo took upon himself a huge responsibility that had not been preceded for centuries. before him other than Maimonides and Baal HaTurim. But they had libraries. They had students to help. He was, like many other Jews who had made it to the Ottoman Empire, with no libraries, with no books, with a tragic situation. And he took upon himself a huge responsibility. And because he was afraid that he may be ruling wrong, he asked an angel to help him. So in his mind, an angel was speaking, encouraging him, telling him, yes, you ruled very well. Oh no, you made a mistake. So he was reading all day law. At night, he was reading the Book of Splendor. And when he went to sleep, the Book of Splendor, angels were speaking about the law, and he wrote down his inner dialogue. Okay, he never meant it to be printed. It was many of us are writing diaries. Many of us are writing personal, but we never think that somebody else would read it. After he passed away, his personal diary, which is extremely personal, where he records what the angel is, what the voice in his mind is talking to him, he wrote it down, and it had been printed in 1648. That became like fresh buns. Everybody wanted to read the book that Yosef Karo, personal autobiography. Now, in this book, the voice is introducing himself as, I am the Shekhinah. I am the daughter of Zion. I am the desolated bride. I am the miserable daughter of Israel holding the dunghills, as a very tragic voice. And he talks about him, and the angel told me. He is like an androgynous perception. The voice always, when the voice speaks, and he records it, the voice is speaking in female voice. But when he speaks about the voice, he said, the angel said this and that. The female voice which is talking to him calls himself Hashchina, Hamalach HaGoel, Ha'em HaMeyaseret, the divine presence, the scolding mother. Sometimes it really sounds like a good Polish mother. The voice says, why did you eat 2 onions? I told you not to eat. Why did you drink water? I told you. He has very highly ascetic demands from himself, and the more he's practicing asceticism, the more the voice said it's not enough. If you drink 2 glasses of water in a course of 24 hours, that's wrong. Anyhow, he writes all that. It's very personal. It's very engaging. The book had been published in 1648 and in 1710, and there were many editions of it. Israel Baal Shem Tov read it like many others read it, only with one difference. He believed that the voice is speaking to him. He placed himself as if he is Yosef Karo, which he was not. He was not a great halachic authority. He was not a great teacher. He was not a great interpreter. Karo was a genius of the halachic tradition. Israel Baal Shem Tov had no halachic claims, none whatsoever. However, in the mystical dialogue written by Yosef Karo about the angelic voice speaking to him, presenting himself as the Shekhinah, the holy feminine voice of the mystical tradition, as the redeeming angel, he said, I am the receiver of this voice. Now, whatever instructions that Karo wrote down in Magid Meisharim, in the upright teaching, Israel Baal Shem Tov said, it's for me and for you all. Okay? What was very personal instructions, self-annihilation, self-abnegation, divestment of corporeality, all this vocabulary is all taken from Magid Meisharim, from the book Autobiographical Mystical Diary of Joseph Karo. But Israel Baal Shem Tov read the book, as he did with the Book of Splendor, as if it's on him, it's the divine voice instructing him. But if he would say only him, mele. But he said, it's for you too. The voice said to Karo, don't eat. So he said, try to eat as little as possible. Don't drink. So he would say, drink as little as possible. In the Hasidic conduct literature, there are such instructions, you don't believe that anybody can live like that. But this is the ideal. So usually we talk about Hasidim as very happy. We have all these descriptions of very happy. No, they're not happy at all. They have very, very hard demands. Yeah. There are very hard demands for practicing life. Now, I don't think that all Hasidim are engaged in that, not at all. As I said, it was much too hard to ask the ascetical instructions, which are detailed in Tzavaat HaRivash and Likutim Yekarim, and numerous books which were published in the end of the 18th century and the turn of the 19th century. The Hasidim were buying the books, they were reading them. How much they were practicing, that's a different thing. But the tzaddikim were expected to practice. The first tzaddikim were expected to say that they're not eating, they're not drinking, they're sleeping very little. All the instructions, the ascetical instructions that the divine voice gave to Rabbi Yosef Karo, and Israel Baal Shem Tov adopted those divine instructions of ascetic kind, of monastic kind, and he replicated it for the whole Hasidic community. They failed to practice it, although they read it, they taught it, but they failed to. But the tzaddikim were trying to practice it. The more they were able to do so, the more the Hasidim would be fascinated with them. The seer of Lublin had covered his eyes so he won't see any, why he's called seer. He covered his eyes of flesh so he would see only for the spiritual world. There are numerous stories about tzaddikim, about the righteous leaders of the Hasidic community who are not eating, who are not drinking, who are covering their eyes. They are practicing absolute divestment of corporeality, so they would be able to attach themselves to the spiritual affluence from above, to share it with their followers. There are beautiful texts by the seer of Lublin, by the Izbitcher Rebbe, and numerous others. Ariel wrote about it in his book on Hasidut Polin. There are numerous schools and teaching of asceticism, but I don't think anybody did it. I think that was their ideal. That was their ideal. But the tzaddikim had to practice it, or to symbolize practice of it, so people would see the ayin and yesh, so people would be able to watch the ascent and descent, the transforming the spiritual into corporeal and the transforming of the corporeal into spiritual, to help drawing down the divine affluence and to help bringing it up back again. To do the ratzov vashov, the to and fro, running and coming back again of the divine processes. Now all of that, and I said only tiny bit of all what they were aiming to do. They were aiming to be part of the spiritual hidden processes in the heavenly world through the theory of language, which claims that every word that you do, say, read, or write is part of elevation of the Shekhinah, the world of speech, the voice that spoke to Yosef Karo, adopted by Israel Baal Shem Tov. And there are numerous quotes, really word by word, verbatim, of the words of the Shekhinah to Karo and the instructions of Israel Baal Shem Tov. That was the inspiration. That's the way Hasidism had started. But it did not carry on like that because, as Weber called it, routinization of charisma. Charisma does not go from generation to generation. A person can be a great charismatic leader, but his son not necessarily so. Hasidism did not start with inheriting a dynasty, not from father to son. It was the great student who was able to reflect the charismatic leadership or to teach the charismatic teachings of the charismatic leader that was not alive anymore. But very soon, from the turn of the 19th century, the Hasidim have been routinized. There were dynasties. Those mystical things were maybe part of the library, but not part of life. How much of the mystical library of Hasidism, which is extensive, which is wonderful, and it doesn't matter if you read Ben Porat Yosef or Toldot Yaakov Yosef or Magid Varav LeYaakov or Oel Elimelech, you would find the being and nothingness and the story about the withdrawal and all that, what I talked about. It's all there. It's in the books. I don't know if anybody reads it today, but they had read it in the 18th century and they were very enthusiastic about it. And they managed to create an alternative reality where there was a lot of light and spirit and divinity and equality and equal access to divine presence to everyone. People were flocking to the Hasidic courts because they loved this new alternative reality. What had happened afterwards is that the world never stands in the place that the mystics wanted. New waves of enlightenment, of the world apart, the wars, different things, had raised new challenges. The mystical language had been marginalized, but that was the foundation of Hasidism, and the great Hasidic library of the 18th century and the first half of the 19th century is full of what I was speaking about. Thank you very much for your...
Thank you very much for this wonderful talk. And if there are questions, this is the time.
Thank you very much for this really wonderful lecture. I wanted to ask you, you ended at the most interesting point for me. What happens next? If this is the base, what happens then in 19th and 20th century? How much does from all these fantastic ideas and learning enter the folklore or everyday, or how we treat it today, or when we see Hasidim today, or even in early 20th century, what do we have from all this base that you described?
I am not an anthropologist, and I'm not an observer of the current Hasidic life. Here, there are people who are anthropologists and who are observing the different expression of Hasidic life today in relation to their previous life. I don't do observing of living people. I'm only reading text, and the more the better. I'm reflecting what they said. I'm trying to make a bridge between the huge library and the audience. I don't know in what way it affects them today. I can say that what was they were engaged in the 18th century. It was huge, huge and flaming influence, although they were excommunicated, although they were marginalized, although they were even put in prison by different rabbinic mitnagdim. They were the core of enthusiastic students who came to study wisdom, to be part of it. But the dynastic structuralization of the new mystical movement, or this new spiritual awakening, the structuring it, the routinization of it, had changed the nature of the community. When everyone was expected to be like that in the generation of Israel Baal Shem Tov and Dov Ber of Mezrich and Yaakov Yosef of Polna, it was one thing. But when the responsibility was shifted to the tzaddikim, it was another thing. They needed to find a new ways of communicating those new ideas, and they needed to do different means, different matters, and that we find in, let's say, in the Hasidic stories. The Hasidim were talking about the tzaddikim in the Hasidic stories. So we know quite a lot about their day-to-day behavior, but that doesn't tell us what is nowadays. So for the question, what can we know?
Now, I'm really talking about the turn of the century, 19th to 20th century, early 20th century. I'm art historian. I dealt a lot with the history of being avant-garde, but also 19th century art. And it always puzzled me to what extent these ideas do enter or do not enter the art. I know it's a huge subject.
Yeah, I wish I could contribute, but I don't. Maybe my friend Shalom Tzabar, who is an art historian, can tell you more about it. No, but it's a very good question, but I don't have the answer. I can only answer about text. The texts are reflecting very strongly what was their world like in the 18th century. How it turned out in the 19th century, that's a different story. Yeah. So, Moshe, okay.
So, look, you have a terrific rhetorical tour de force.
Thank you. Now it starts, but I don't agree with anything.
Well, let's put it this way. I think Dubnov lives.
Yeah, okay.
You say it, what Dubnov says, but much more dramatically, much better. But since Dubnov, we've found out a few things. I can't go into all the details, all the contradictions, all the exaggerations. I'll just talk about two things. Number one, all the blood libels and the terrible situation and how depressed everybody was. You didn't mention Tachvatat, but I'm sure you were thinking of it. One example, dozens of wooden synagogues were built in the second half of the 17th century, the first half of the 18th century. Each of these buildings required, first of all, permission from the authorities. Secondly, money. Thirdly, planning, coordination. Many of them were located next to the cathedral of the town. Now, people don't make investments like this because they think that their lives are going to be snuffed out tomorrow.
Well,
These are, and you yourself said in your book, if you read the archival documents, you might think that life wasn't so bad.
Yeah.
But I don't read that.
no, I didn't say that. I didn't say I don't read it. I said my friend Moshe Rossman is telling us about the archival. What no.
If you read that, you'll think.
No,
that,
but what
don't listen to that.
No.
There's something called genre criticism. You have to, first of all, decide what genre your sources belong to, and what you could expect them to say, and what you can, the kind of information you can learn from them or not learn from them. If a rabbi makes a sermon, well, of course, whatever he's talking about is the worst problem in the history of the world. But you have to weigh that against the facts. So that's number one. Number two, as you said, the Baal Shem Tov did not write a book. You could read out loud, in less time than you spoke, everything that he wrote. And add another hour, and you can read whatever people who actually heard him talk quoted him, which is in itself problematic, but forget that. And you make this like he is this unbelievable philosopher. I think of the Midrash that God takes Moshe Rabbeinu to the Beit Midrash to see Rabbi Akiva teaching, and he's making all these tremendous midrashim, I'll call ot v'ot tamim v'talim. And he says, and Moshe said, I said that? But then he heard him say, Alach Moshe Sinai.
He's pleased.
And saying it in his name, okay, so he felt good. And I think the Baal Shem Tov would have a similar reaction listening to you.
No.
If I were a representative of Chabad, I would immediately give you a contract as a preacher.
Well, since I spent, let's say, a jubilee of my life reading Hasidism, I had written on the second generation of Hasidut Chabad, and I submitted my dissertation in 1976. Let's say from the early 70s until today, that's a jubilee. I read 50 years of Hasidic literature, and although I said that Israel Baal Shem Tov did not write a book, but his students wrote voluminously. Everything.
His students did not write voluminously.
His
students.
Yaakov Yosef, he wrote
one book. The editors wrote the book, not him. He did not write one book. They took his notebooks and they created.
Well, his notebooks are.
Magi of Mezrich did not write one book.
Well, somebody wrote it.
Took notes from the students, put them together, and made a book.
So what?
So what? So Lutzker is telling us what the Maggid said, what the Baal Shem Tov said.
Okay, now, you can criticize that in numerous ways. Nevertheless, it had been written, it had been read, it had been transformed.
Okay.
Now, for them...
You're telling us what the image of the Baal Shem Tov is, what people projected onto the Baal Shem Tov, what they thought of the Baal Shem Tov. That's fine. That's great. But that's not what he did, it's not what he said, it's not what he taught.
Well, that's exactly everything I said. You know, I wrote a book of 2 volumes of 1,400. Okay, fine. The book is the Baal Shem Tov and his contemporaries. And on every contention that I said, you know very well that I brought the exact quotations on everything. Now, you say it was transmitted from one to the other. So what? Those were the teachings that his students wrote down, and they thought it's valuable. I didn't say he's Marcel Proust and he wrote the Cherchez la Time Perdue. Okay?
Sounds like it.
No, I said that his teachings are fascinating. I've been fascinated by that for 50 years. Okay, I think his teachings are fascinating. I think that they were transmitted by students who were fascinated by him. The fact that they wrote it in notebooks and their students edited it properly doesn't make it any less valuable. I don't see at all the point of saying that it's not valuable because it had been, let's say that the Maggid of Mezrich was sick, he was not able to write down. So his student, Shlomo Flutz, took his notebooks from the years that he was able to prepare his sermons.
He took notebooks from the other students.
Well, so,
take one notebook from the Maggid,
so it doesn't matter. There were people who were present who were saying and recording the words of the Maggid of Mezrich.
He did not write the book.
It doesn't matter, Moshe, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Those are schools. Those are schools that people are saying together, you know.
The school, that's it.
Yeah. So what? It's okay. People were, you know, the sermons were given on Shabbat. Nobody was allowed to write on Shabbat. In Motzei Shabbat, they would say, he said this, he said that. It was this parasha, that parasha. This illuminating verse on that, They were recording down in Motzei Shabbat. What they heard, there were numerous pages. Then they edited it. It's okay, it's fine. I don't see why the identity of the writer makes any difference. The teachings make difference.
What you just said, say that sentence again.
Yeah, I don't think that the identity of the very writer makes the difference. I think it's a school that carry a tradition and they transmit it in numerous ways and numerous. You know that if you'll take any 3 Hasidic books of the circles of Israel Baal Shem Tov, Yaakov Yosef, and the Maggid of Mezrich, and you can open in any book, in any page, you would find Ayin Veyesh and Tzimtzum and Melo Kol Haaretz. They would.
And Yaakov Yosef contradict each other.
So what? But they have also they have common things. Okay, okay.
Yes,
okay.
We just genre which is similar throughout what they're trying to say. Each student will have his own take, but if you look at that as an entire school, you will end up with a coherent fabric that's been created.
Yeah, that's exactly what I say.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it
30 years after
is
the
the
person
creation of the tapestry.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
It is the creation of the tapestry that is important,
Yes.
not the individual.
Absolutely. Exactly the same about the Lurianic literature, exactly the same about the Heichalot literature. It's not the identified writer, it's the school and it's the tapestry with many contributors. That's exactly it. Yeah. Okay, Azir.
One more question. One more last question.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Okay.
The Magid Mesharim, do they use it all? Does he all mention Rabbi Karol using song or nigun?
No, usually what he does, he reads a sentence of the Mishnah. He says, Karati Mishnayot. You know, he reads Mishnah. And that, the very action, he says, Adonai Sfatai Tiftach Vepi Yagid Tehillatcha. And he says that Sfatai is not my lips, it's like the borders of my soul. Safa, like Sfata Nahar is the border of the river, okay? Like, open and enlarge my limitations and let the divine light or the divine voice speak in me. And that's the way he starts. Then he hears and writes down. I don't recall that he's mentioning singing. You know, that's a big book, but he might be there. But I don't recall any musical reflection. The only one who is really interested in music in the Hasidic library is the son of Shneur Zalman of Ladi, Dov Ber, the Mittler Rebbe. He is explaining the ascent of the world of the Sfirot according to the musical connotation or structure. That's very interesting. He is the only one I know that has a musical understanding or education, and he's using it in order to teach.
Okay, so
somebody else wanted to ask. Yeah.
Thank you for the lectures, first of all. Something that bothered me was a bit the depiction of the description of the opposition of the Gaon of Vilna to the Hasidim. He's basically painted. It seems basically painted as a fool, so that he didn't understand correctly the nature of Hasidism. He mixed it all up with Shabtai Tzvi and other antinomial movements, and the whole thing was like an idiotic mistake that he. Well, that was what it sounded like to me.
No, I wouldn't use the word idiotic. The Gaon of Vilna was a genius. He was not an idiot. However, he misinterpreted the turn of reality. He was afraid, and people told him, Lashon Hara, people told him they are Sabbateans, we are suspecting them. Now, there were no printed matter at 1772 of Hasidic origin. The very first historical documents about Hasidism are the bill of excommunication of the Misnagdim, okay? He didn't see a printed book. The very first printed book came at 1780, okay? He had excommunicated them at 1772. People talked, people misinformed, people caused him to be suspicious. The rabbi of Vilna had all kinds of reasons to blacken the faces of the Hasidim. So I don't think at all it's right to say that it was idiotic, but it was a mistake. But he did understand something very correct of what he heard that they were teaching. When you say that God is equally present everywhere, and every human being can equally approach God, and you don't need any mediators, teachers, rabbis, a communal hierarchy. There is an anarchic potential there. The Hasidim were not anarchistic and not antinomistic, but there was a potential, like in any mystical teaching, which is submerging under the hierarchical order. So he understood something true. Mysticism is not a way to conduct a community. It's good for a small circle, but when it is spreading, there is a certain danger in that.
Okay. But so we, as scientists, or if I could be so bold, Madei Hayadut, we to test this hypothesis. Don't go and misunderstand.
Yeah.
There's an antithesis. The antithesis is that he correctly understood the nature of the Hasidic movement as it was developing. Now, how can we test whether the thesis is correct or the antithesis is correct? The answer is that we can't. We can't test which thesis is correct. Because we live in a dimension in which the Gaon of Vilna issued the excommunication. And we only can see the results of what happened after that was issued. But if it had
Rav Shneor Zalman,
we do not know how it would have developed.
No. It did not interfere with their development. Rav Shneor Zalman of Ladi said, Kol HaShomea Yitzchak. To say to us, we are rabbinical authorities. You know, at that time, Rab Levi Yitzchak Miberdichev was the rabbi of Pinsk, Cyril of Lublin. There were many Hasidic rebbes who were also rabbinical authorities. He said to say on us, Ohavei Torah veLomdea, to say on us that we are heretics or Sabbateans, Kol HaShomea Yitzchak. It is ridiculous. It doesn't make any sense.
There were antinomial tendencies within Hasidim, and some of them even exist to this day.
No.
In opposition to halakha, for example, prayer times. This is one example. But these antinomial tendencies have been very much
this is not antinomian. I highly recommend on the work of Iris Brown on the reason why Hasidim are praying late, because of some instructions in the Lorianic literature that you need to come to prayer when you're utterly clean with your body, and that may take time for people. It has to do, there is no antinomistic intention there, none whatsoever. It is what we say, mehadrim b'kodesh. They are taking upon themselves high degree of cleanliness and aesthetics and hygienics that nobody else does but them, because they believe that it has effect on the divine upper worlds, that you must come with complete clarity, cleanliness, and so on and so forth. So it's not antinomistic in any way, not antinomistic. They don't do anything with antinomistic intention. There is one thing that is worthwhile mentioning. There is a difference between the Loriani Karo Tzfat Halacha and between the Ashkenazi Minhag and Halacha. The Ashkenazim believes in the rulings of Rema, while the Sfaradim and Mekubalim and Hasidim follow Rabbi Yosef Karo and Rabbi Isaac Luria. All of them are people of great holiness and importance. There is no antinomistic one there, okay? Karo and the Ari is Minhag Sfarad, and Harema is Minhag Ashkenaz. On issues such as whether one should don the tefillin in Chol HaMoed, the Karo and the Ari say one thing, and Minhag Ashkenaz say another thing. So it's not antinomistic. Those are two different sources about halachic thing, which has public implications because you do it in synagogue or you don't do it in synagogue. About the shchita, they are mehadrim b'kodesh. They want harder criterions of the nature of the knife that you use for ritual slaughtering. It's not antinomistic. On the other hand, on the other way around, they try to have more holy and better and more precise because they believe that everything that they do is affecting the heavenly world. So it's not antinomistic in the least. It is extremist mystical instructions. They are all written. They did not invent anything. It's all written in 16th century Kabbalah and in the Zohar, and they do what they do. But the Gaon and others say, this is for the elite. It's not for everyone. This is, I may do it. I may not put tefillin in Chol HaMoed because the Zohar said you should not. But the rest of the people should put tefillin according to Minhag Ashkenaz. But Israel Baal Shem Tov said, no, according to the Zohar, everyone is not putting, and that's the way it should be. Okay, so those are two halachic issues. It's not antinomistic. Sabbatianism is antinomistic. They say there is no need to keep this and that and this and that. The Hasidim never said that there is no need to keep any mitzvah. On the contrary, they were adding hidur mitzvah vehidur mitzvah, the more the better. So claiming, charging them with antinomism is a complete mistake. They are extreme on the religious demands. They make it harder and harder on themselves, not easier, and certainly not deleting anything. Okay, I see.
Thank you very much. And I would like to thank our colleagues.